to be with you and want to welcome our panelists, Marilyn Theot, Monique Long, Kimberly Kleiman Lee, and our newest panelist, Bailey Walker, who's helping us with the conversation today. So as we start the conversation and as I throw the slides up for you or bring the slides up for you to think about, I want to do a quick review of where we've been and where we're going, okay? So where we've been is that we've had 3 coaching in a virtual environment conversations. The first one was on Shackleton's journey to the Antarctic and the leadership lessons there. And so we had a great conversation about, everything's changing. I refuse to call it a new normal. I call it a new reality. What's real for us today and how are we engaging in what the reality is in the moment? And one of my favorite expressions from my former employer was, where is the puck going? And so how is we as leaders and coaches moving in sync with where things are going as a new reality? I think we set people up for failure when we tell them it's the new normal, because normal implies that we're going to go back to the way things were. And I think we want to say, okay, what's real for us and what's happening now? We also talked last week in our theme of coaching in a virtual reality of back to basics. So remembering some of those things that we've known, that we've been taught, that we've been doing, but maybe we haven't been doing them in a virtual environment. So I hope you had a chance to join us last week. And if you didn't, that's okay, because we will be posting the webinars on our Communities of Practice room at Global IOC, and they'll be posted sometime next week. So you'll be able to go back and listen to not only those, but the Just One Step Monday calls and the Developing as a Coach Wednesday calls. Now, really good news, we're integrating everything into a Friday call. So the Friday calls starting next Friday are going to be an integration of Just One Step, Developing as a Coach, and Coaching in a Virtual Environment. And the title is Coaching to Agility. Kind of going back to what I said earlier, what's the new reality? How are we agile in that new reality? So coaching to agility, self, coach leader, and organization. So you can see we will be able to weave those other topics, those other themes rather, into just one theme on one day. So you don't have to register for 3 days, just one day. And we're moving it to 10 o'clock in the morning, Eastern time. We had some feedback from the attendees that noon was a really hard time for them, noon Eastern. So we're moving to 10 Eastern, and that's going to be really good for many of our South Africans as well, as we move it back 2 hours on a Friday evening for them, and so they'll be able to participate. So those of you who are attending today from South Africa, we appreciate you coming at this time at 6 o'clock for you. So if you want more information on where we're going and where our puck is going, please reach out to Global IOC or go out to globalioc.com. We'll be adding a lot of information over the coming weeks about the work that we're doing in Communities of Practice, along with our blog and along with our newsletter and just upcoming events. So stay tuned with us. So going back over, why are we even doing this? Why are we having another theme in May? Why would we do that? And that's because I think people really want to have coaching conversations about what's going on in their world. And that leaders and coaches are coming to us and saying they want to continue to sharpen the saw from a virtual perspective. And one of the things I was just talking with the panelists, i.e. faculty, earlier this morning about, one of the things that I think we bring to the table is how do we bring the connection and the interweaving of science and art. So what's the art of coaching and what's the science of coaching? So most of what is contained in our webinars has a background that is bounded in science, but then how do we take that knowledge and apply it? So that's part of our why, is bringing information forward for you to use in your practice. So that's the integration of the new material. My goal is that you have one idea today that you walk away with that's going to help you improve your coaching practice, both virtually and if you're doing anything in person or on Zoom or however you're doing your coaching. that you will actually have some ideas and tools for growth. So quickly, from a housekeeping perspective, what I want you to think about is that we will use the questions, the Q&A, to post questions at the end of the call. Everyone can see your questions. Now, we do have breaks where we're going to have our panelists answer questions, but if we don't get to all of them, then we'll discuss them at the end of the call. If we don't get them answered, then we will post them in our LinkedIn page. So go like us at LinkedIn, the Global IOC LinkedIn page, or we will actually have some things posted in the community as a practice of some of the questions that arose during the webinars. And again, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. So let's dig in. When we think about coaching through distractions, so sometimes what gets in our way of being distracted is do we have a why? Do we know our why? And one of my favorite authors in talking about why is Simon Sinek. And he's asking us to go through a process of why, what, and how. More importantly, how do we connect people with being the dreamer of their dream? In our program, we use a lot of work from Dr. Richard Boyatzis at Case Western Reserve University, and we use the intended change theory, where the context of the change theory is to ask a person, what is their dream state? What is their ideal state? And then what's real? So that gets a person really thinking about their why. When's the last time you had a conversation with those people you're talking to, whether an external coach coaching someone within a corporation or as a leader? When's the last time you asked a person about their dream? Simon Sinek says that when we think about the why is actually our clarity, our purpose, our passion. For those of you who were able to attend the Just One Step, we've been talking about passion and purpose and how we manage energy and how we drive for success, and how important that is from that perspective. And a lot of times people aren't really sure about what they're passionate about. So what is the people that you're coaching, what is their why? Why are they doing what they do? And then the how becomes, what is the direction and discipline of our energy? What does that look like? And so, the coaching and working from a home environment produces some distractions that you didn't have in the office, but maybe eliminate some distractions too. So how do you help them work through their direction and discipline? And then think about, what is it they're doing, okay? And so how do you help your teams think about consistent behaviors that match back to the why? If this is your dream, if you want to achieve your goals, if you want to exceed your goals, and if that is really what you want to do this year, or whatever your dream is that relates to work and, professional, personal, come together. If you've done any of the work around 12-week year, that you will know that the author says it's really important that we're matching professional and personal goals. So we don't want to alleviate or eliminate either side of that. But what are those consistent behaviors that people need to engage in? So passion and purpose. So when we think about passion and purpose, we think about, I want to share with you, and I actually had it set to go. Okay. A TED Talk from Angela Duckworth, who's done a lot of the work on grit. And I love this conversation, so bear with me.
The one thing we know how to measure best is IQ. But what if doing well in school and in life depends on much more than your ability to learn quickly and easily? So I left the classroom and I went to graduate school to become a psychologist. I started studying kids and adults in all kinds of super challenging settings. And in every study, my question was, who is successful here and why? My research team and I went to West Point Military Academy. We tried to predict which cadets would stay in military training and which would drop out. We went to the National Spelling Bee and tried to predict which children would advance farthest in competition. We studied rookie teachers working in really tough neighborhoods, asking which teachers are still going to be here in teaching by the end of the school year. And of those, Who will be the most effective at improving learning outcomes for their students? We partnered with private companies asking which of these salespeople is going to keep their jobs and who's going to earn the most money. In all those very different contexts, one characteristic emerged as a significant predictor of success. And it wasn't social intelligence, it wasn't good looks, physical health, and it wasn't IQ. It was grit. Grit is passion and perseverance for very long-term goals. Grit is having stamina. Grit is sticking with your future, day in, day out, not just for the week, not just for the month, but for years, and working really hard to make that future a reality. Grit is living life like it's a marathon, not a sprint. A few years ago, I started studying grit in the Chicago public schools. I asked thousands of high school juniors to take grit questionnaires, and then waited around more than a year to see who would graduate. Turns out that grittier kids were significantly more likely to graduate, even when I matched them on every characteristic I could measure. Things like family income, standardized achievement test scores, even how safe kids felt when they were at school. So it's not just at West Point or the National Spelling Bee that grit matters, it's also in school.
So I'm going to stop there. If you want to hear the rest of it, please go out to the TED Talks and Google Angela Duckworth. Phenomenal. She also wrote the book Grit. And so you're probably asking, why did we start with Simon Sinek and Know Your Why? Because your why is what delivers on passion and perseverance. You think about, your purpose. It's your stable and far-reaching goal. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And I know as we coach and we lead people into the next reality, the new reality, that some of the purposes are going to change. And so it really behooves you to think about, where are your people from their forward pointing arrow? What is the contribution they want to make to their world? How do they want to engage in a meaningful and satisfying life? Where does resilience, motivation, and the drive to deal with up and downs in life fit into staying clear on their purpose and that staying active with their goal? Purpose requires self-reflection, self-awareness, and self-knowledge. We're not just doing things anymore for the sake of doing them. And I promise you that in my conversations, what I'm noticing is, as people have had 6-8 weeks to reflect on what matters most, some of these purposes are shifting. So, the question is, what kind of person am I, and what kind of person do I want to be? And that goes along with Dr. Boyatzis's work in the intended change theory, is who do I want to be? And so having those conversations with the people that we're coaching. So purpose and passion. Purpose is about a vision and mission, making values-based decisions that align with our behaviors, that our actions reflect our values, and that our values are linked to our mission, which is also our purpose. And then our passion is, how do we commit? Are we willing to go above and beyond? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Are we willing to persevere? And that's what Angela was saying. Perseverance and passion are what make the difference in terms of people being able to be ultimately incredibly successful. And passion shows up in many areas of our life. So it goes back to what I was saying about Brian Moran's 12-week year and how important it is to make sure that we're uniting professional and personal goals. So I'm going to start with a question for the panel. I hope you're all ready. What's been your experience in helping leaders guide the development and the enhancement of passion and purpose with those people they coach? Monique, let's start with you.
Okay, well, what I find is a lot of times the leaders that I work with have not been really asking those questions of their team. When they're looking at their direct reports, they just want output. They don't really care what the passion purpose is. This person signed up for their job and they're there. So the idea of asking those questions and getting that kind of engagement from their team is really starting from that leader and having them orient their relationship with their team in a little different approach, being curious and being aware and recognizing that they're going to get more and look better if they have their team aligned with their why. So getting them invested in that thought process and recognizing that that's important then helps them say, hey, how about your own why? You recognize how it's going to serve you if your people are doing something passionate. Now let's look at how about you? Where's your passion and how you can better serve? So sometimes that backdoor approach is one to lead toward that leader who's blocked and doesn't really want to jump into that self-awareness. And that's been helpful. And one thing I wanted to think on that perseverance is that there are shifts and ups and downs, and it's not a straight, smooth road climbing up to the top. Persevering is easy when everything's falling in line and you're just skyrocketing, but that's not the reality. So helping them navigate and adapt when things don't always look great and they hit obstacles. So those are some things, and helping that that leader look at how they might be in a style that's sucking the energy out of their team, or are they really supporting them? So there's just a lot of ways in which you can help the leader get to the why with their own team.
Awesome. Thank you. Kimberly, tell us what your thoughts are about this question.
So a lot of what I encourage when I work with leaders about this topic is this concept of just being a lifelong learner. So can they maintain a level of curiosity, not only about themselves, their teams, certainly their future, and the kind of work they want to be doing passionately, I think is pretty critical. And there's some companies, quite frankly, that are really modeling this well. Google is very famously well known for their passion project approach, where they allow their workers to have 10% of their weekly time dedicated to working on projects that are meaningful and excite them. It could be a new project that pertains to their work, or quite frankly, something totally outside of what they get paid to do at the company. LinkedIn has something very similar called In Day, where they give their workers off one Friday every month to go and work on something that they have passion about. So not only does it help them to hone a skill or work on a skill that's important to them, but it also gives them exposure to things that perhaps are new or different to them, where they can expand what they know to be their passion in a new and different way.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Some more resources for you. Marilyn, what are your thoughts about?
Yeah, so, I'd echo a lot of what Kimberly and Monique said. And I'm going to go back to what Monique said about leaders need to be having this conversation with their teams. But what I run into, the reality that a lot of people don't work for LinkedIn and Google and some of the places, Epic is another one that's allowing people time to pursue their passion. I've had leaders push back and say, well, I haven't ever asked any of those questions. And this person's been working for me for 4 years. I can't go back and ask now. And my response is absolutely you can. And to try to convince the leaders to be able to go back and understand the purpose and passion for their teams, I use the slingshot analogy, where, with a slingshot, you have to pull back and you have to stop before you can really propel something forward. And so I talk about taking some slingshot time and be able to stop, ask some of these questions. And the questions I recommend they ask their team are questions such as, what brings you the most joy? When do you feel the most like yourself in the job? Take time, understand it. I also have a document that I've created called a personal strategy map that I not only recommend my leaders do, but that they have their teams do, in which they really look at their why and their purpose beyond just the job, because we don't have two lives, a home life and a personal life. We have one life, and boy, that's never been more evident than in the last 6 weeks. So those are some things I would say I've been using and doing with people.
That's awesome. And thank you, Marilyn. And thank you, Kimberly and Monique. And Marilyn, I love that it's never too late to go back. As a coach, I always say I reserve the right to do-over. I can ask any question. I can repeat any question. And especially at this critical time now, it is kind of a do-over. What do we want to dream? How do we want to dream together about what we can be? So thank you for introducing that. So motivation. So what motivates people that keeps them from being distracted? And so if we think about, you know, the two places of motivation, we think about intrinsic and we think about extrinsic. So we think about intrinsic is people having a sense of competence, autonomy, a sense of choice, and that meaningfulness and progress count in there as well. So when you think about people's passion, they're most passionate when they feel they can do their job well, that they have the autonomy to make the choices to do the things well, and then that includes that same sense of choice, but they're passionate with the meaningfulness and progress. And extrinsic motivation, we all know what that means. There's a reward for doing what I do. And what happens in an intrinsic motivation situation is if we want people to do more, we have to keep upping the rewards. So the more we can turn this back into what would be an intrinsic motivation situation, the more successful we're going to be with our people, especially working from home. So think about then that what has happened, you know, not even with the COVID-19, but prior to that, is that work has become more complex. It requires more self-management, and it's not performed centrally. It was never more true than it is right now. So the complexity and the self-management is what you really want to focus on from a distraction-proof virtual coaching situation. So when we think about extrinsic motivation, we think about the motivation that impacts the quantity of work. Intrinsic motivation impacts the quality of work. So how do we help people think in that intrinsic motivation space if we want them to be as successful as possible? Dan Pink says in Drive, extrinsic rewards can only lower performance, jettison creativity, increase unethical activity, and limit long-term thinking. So the more we can move that slide into intrinsic motivation around competence, choice, which is autonomy, and passion, which is why we started off with passion, then we get more intrinsic motivation. Obviously, you need a balance of both. We all want a paycheck. I get that. And we want the rewards for some of the things we do, but we do need a balance of both. But the more it's weighed towards intrinsic, the more our people are really chasing what matters to them. So just a quick review of a study that talked about the antecedents that cause people to go above and beyond. And I've talked to many leaders who their staff are still going above and beyond. And so what people look at is, what's my leader doing? This was a salesperson study, but let's call it just all people. What's my leader doing? What kind of effort and performance is my leader putting out? What does my leader expect of me? What's my relationship with my leader? And do I have any power in my role, or is it all power over and power under? What's the organizational culture? Does it reinforce me going above and beyond? Is there an intrinsic motivation piece that gives me energy to go above and beyond? So it connects to my purpose, my passion, it connects to my competence level, or it connects to my autonomy. I have choice. Where's my need for achievement? How willing am I to stay in the job long term? Do I have a work commitment to stay with this organization? And what's the work mood? And interestingly enough, the work mood, you know, when we're all together in one environment, we can talk about emotional contagion and our people complaining and our people upset. The work mood now is, how are we staying connected? Because there's been this real disconnect around that social piece. So are we staying connected with what's possible as we talk with one another? Are we staying connected with, oh, it's the worst thing that could possibly be happening? So we want to think about, if we want people to go above and beyond, where are we in all of these spaces with our direct reports? And then I'll give a shout out to Drive, which is a Dan Pink book, who says, with the exception of routine tasks, employee productivity declines when rewards increase. So we don't want to think about the rewards in terms of the rewarded behavior in terms of money or other rewards, but an investment by the leader in what's going on with your employee, that increases the autonomy, giving people permission to do what they need to do in the way they need to do it. Are there any issues around competence? And so when we think about when we're coaching people from home, how can we move out of a reward conversation into, what are you dreaming? What do you want? talking about the three aspects of intrinsic motivation, and autonomy, mastery, and purpose. We talked about purpose, mastery is competence, and autonomy. And so finding that deeper meaning, Pink believes that the management style of carrot and stick actually hinders performance. So I know it's been hard to think about people working from home. And sometimes we do have people that are not doing what they're supposed to do. So how can you coach those people individually and not make it a group discussion by, helping people be the best they can be no matter where they are on that scale, but rather the carrot and the stick actually reduces people's willingness and their motivation to do what needs to be done. So quickly, intrinsic focuses on quality of the work that they're doing. Extrinsic focuses on the quantity. We need a balance of both when we think about how we're motivating people in a work environment and coaching from a virtual environment rather. So question for the panel. What can leaders and coaches do to guide above and beyond behaviors while in the work from home environment? So I'm going to start with Marilyn. So Marilyn, what can we do to help in this process?
So I think what I have been talking to a lot of the executives that I'm coaching, they need to stop and take the time to ask the questions that we just talked about before. If they haven't asked those questions, they need to ask, or they need to bring that back. They need to bring people back to what is driving them in the job. And then the leaders have to really listen. And this is taking time. They're saying, well, when I'm calling somebody or we're having a Zoom meeting, we just try to make it quick so we can get through what the tasks are that need to be done. And that's being very short-sighted. So stopping, taking the time, asking the questions, listening, and you really have to be able to connect what they want to be doing, what their passion is with the work. And if you can't, and I say this way before we're in a COVID work from home mode, if you can't, I question, is that person the right person for the job? And so I'm always very realistic in this area. I think there are things leaders can do, both intrinsically and extrinsically to motivate people. But if people don't have that within them, the grit, the whatever you want to call it, it's going to be really difficult to coach to that. So I know that wasn't a very good answer. What can you do now in the work from home? Because my answer is you should have figured out before if they are the right person in the right, in the right job.
That's the perfect answer. And, and what, Marilyn, thank you for bringing that up. There shouldn't be, when we talk about back to basics coaching last week, there shouldn't be that much of a difference between what you're doing now and what you were doing. But if you weren't doing it then, you probably really need to look at your way of coaching your people now to make sure it's integrated into the relationship you have with the person. So Kimberly, what are your thoughts?
So I love what Marilyn said in terms of make sure you have your finger on the pulse of the talent that you have around you. I think assuming that two things might be going on right now, especially in this unusual time. One, you might see that talent fading a bit or maybe presenting itself in a different way. They're just not as confident. They're not as thorough. They're not as ambitious, however that's defined by the leader, or they're a bit lost. So I always look to a measurement of discretionary effort. So how are you looking at your employees in terms of what they're contributing? And discretionary effort is typically defined as effort employees would give without you ever having to ask. It's kind of that automatic above and beyond component. So right now in this uncertain time, I think that's usually obtained by building trusting relationships. Again, to Marilyn's point, you can't do it the day that we close the office doors. You have to have done it all along and created that culture. And then now more than ever, over communicate, create really transparent communication channels that allow people to put their fears at rest so that they can offer discretionary effort, having some sort of confidence, of course, in the leader that they serve. I think some of the best work here to really reference is servant leadership. So whether you read Hunter or Blanchard, Lead Like Jesus is another one, the author is escaping me. But there are several books out there that really talk about how do you look at your purpose here as being helping them get there. and no better time than to focus on that than a crisis like we're in right now.
Thanks, Kimberly. Great thoughts. And we will give you the resources after the call. They'll be available in communities of practice. So Monique, what are your thoughts?
I'm really following in what they're saying and looking at how do you measure what that expectation is, going above and beyond. I agree that people are off right now in how they're performing. When you have leaders who say, well, the people are just off and there's some insecurities, absolutely there's a lot of fear, because out of sight, out of mind, and being more distanced from leadership and authority, there's a lot of room for people to feel unsettled and wondering if their jobs will be cut. There's all this language out there in the workplace, and we just don't know. There's so much uncertainty about when we come out of this, like it's a tunnel that we're in. And once I'm on the other side, am I going to have anything left of my life that I recognize? So I think we're in a very high tech, high touch time. Remember, that was kind of a movement back when, maybe 20 years ago, there's all this buzz of high tech, high touch. And we were all reading books about that and how to plan for technology and being high tech, high touch. I think more than ever, we are truly at high tech, high touch. And by that high touch, I think the leaders need to really be taking one-on-one time with each employee and touching base and saying, let's look at your job description and what you really are providing in day to day. And is that realistic? What are the measurables around what you're doing that we need to address and redefine and recalibrate? And what can you additionally that's not in here bring to the table? Let's tap into the best of what you have to offer, blow this thing up and restructure it if we need to. But let's get at what's keeping you most engaged and most powerful and feeling most valued. And how can I do that? Where do you feel most joy in what you're doing? And what excites you and makes you what do you want to step into? You have all these choices. What could you pick? Pick one. So I think in making it more of a shared relationship right now, being real partners in where we're going and having that sort of shift in recalibrating, redefining would, for me, be key.
That's awesome. And you actually answered a question we have from the audience, which was, what are some examples of confidence boosting messages? And I think that I love your train of thought or words that say, high touch, high tech. So we're going to have to do it from tech. So confidence boosting messages is when you're talking with people and they're talking about what they're doing, how are you coaching them? How are you, a lot of people want to share. I love what Monique was saying, is that we don't have those water cooler conversations anymore. And so when you are having those interactions with people, are you having questions? Are you guiding the conversation around how well they're doing and what they're doing in terms of their job, and what can we celebrate? And what are you excited about? And where do you still have areas to grow? So if you look at the intended change theory that we talked about earlier, you've got the real state and the ideal state aligned with the real state. Where are the gaps? Where are the strengths? So how do we leverage the strengths, and how do we talk about the gaps in a very positive way in terms of doing things that you can still do in a virtual environment and still stretch and grow? So the confidence boosting messages are really about, where's the yardstick, where's the measurement, and how can we get better? So it's about getting better every day. So digging into the rest of the slides, one of my authors that I love to use around distraction is Greg McKeown, and he wrote the book, The Essentialism rather. So doing the essential. And so the mindset of somebody who is really focused on the essential says, I have individual choice. I can choose how I spend my time. We can choose how we spend our energy and time. Remember, that is a piece of intrinsic motivation. So now we're connecting intrinsic motivation to doing what's essential. Noise, I eliminate noise, or I limit it. And so we recognize that most of what we hear is noise, and only a few things are valuable, and we listen for the valuable things. I love his comment when he says, we can't have it all. Which problem do I want to solve? If I can't do everything today, which problem do I want to solve when I don't do something? Everything changes when we give ourselves permission to be selective in what we choose to do. And how can you guide your teams in doing what gives them the most energy? and is work that needs to be done. So an essentialist thinks in terms of, I choose to do what I'm doing. I understand that almost everything is non-essential. I focus on the essential. I view the vital few things I have to do from the trivial many. Which problem do I want? I create for myself space to explore the options I have. I listen for signals. So this is the difference between noise and signal. And for those of you that have been following our other conversations about noise, we know that noise is very distracting. It's hypothetical. It's unusable. It's not something I can do anything with it. I control what I can control. And so the noise takes us off our course because we can't really control what the noise is talking about. I can listen for the signal. What's directionally correct for me? I say yes to things that matter. I see boundaries as empowering. And finally, protect the asset. And the asset is you. How do I protect myself? So when I think about that, what I use to talk about the asset is the work from Human Performance Institute that says we have a quantity of energy, which is physical. We have emotional energy, which is our quality of energy. We have a focus of energy, which is our mental, and the force of our energy is spiritual. The spiritual is our passion and our purpose, which is what we started with. The mental is the stories we tell that align with what we really want most in that spiritual space. Emotionally, our emotions are aligned with optimism and hope and positivity versus the more the negative ones. And then the physically, like we monitor our energy around sleep, nutrition, exercise, and just, the recovery pieces that we have in life. So we have to protect the asset. For more information on that, we have a webinar, Managing Energy, Not Time, that it will be available in the communities of practice, like I said, next week. I like to use Covey's book on the 7 habits of effective people. In fact, his son has just had out with a new edition of it, and nothing's been really revised, but it's just kind of thinking for 30 years later. But how do we help people think about what's important and urgent and not urgent, but important? How do we keep people out of not important and urgent? And so many times you get a call and somebody wants you to do something right now. And how do we guide our direct reports and guide the people we coach to really be able to get clear about what is important and urgent and what is not urgent, but still important, and stay out of the waste and stay out of deception. So this is a really great quadrant for thinking about coaching someone who's struggling down here. You can pull it down from the internet and use it as a tool. So now we get into yes and no. And so when we think about, Gandhi says, a no uttered from the deepest conviction is better than a yes uttered to please, or worse, to avoid trouble. And so we get into why we say yes all the time. We say yes to things because they feel safer. We say yes because we want to help. We say yes to things because we're afraid of being rude. We say yes to things because we're afraid of missing out. We say yes to things because we think it's an opportunity that we just can't miss out on. It takes less time. Okay, I'll do it. And then we come back to trying to figure out how we're going to do it. That becomes the challenge. It doesn't burn bridges. People still like us. And there's some people that really like being busy. And what I've noticed is that this last one of constant busyness is falling to the wayside. People don't like constant busyness. Everybody I'm talking to that used to be super busy are now saying, I love the new environment. I love that I have time to do the things I love doing. So saying yes might not be a problem, but as you're coaching your direct reports and the people that you manage, helping them find ways to say no to things that they find themselves kind of locked into. So how do we help them say no? We teach them to pause. When somebody asks you for something, you can say, let me think about that. Let me think about that and get back to you. You can say then soft no, which I love coaching people in this space, which is, I can't right now, but later. If somebody is pushing you for an urgent answer right now, you say, I can't do it right now, but I can do it later. And if they want something right now, they'll go to person B. Let me check your calendar and get back to you. That was part of the pause. use out of office messages when people call you and they expect, so guess what? We can't do that right now. I just realized it as I'm reading it. But how can you block your time? Somebody sent me a question last week and said, what's my perspective on time blocking? And that I think you have to time block, and you have to time block in, working from home environments. These are the time I'm going to give to the effort of that deep thinking. Cal Newport has a book called Deep Work, and we're doing a lot of professional work at a higher level that's critical for thinking. So maybe you can't use an out of office message, but you could say, I'm not available during these times when somebody reaches out, and say it with no, giving no a kind of a humorous, I gave that up for Lent, or that's not something I do anymore, giving people permission to say no to the things that are in their way. And then helping people think through the things they're doing that are not essential and not efficient. So we think if we've invested time in something, we should keep doing it. Is that true? Is it really true? So what's the sunk cost I have invested in something? Can I let go of an idea? Is there something that I've been doing because it's become my routine, my habit? The endowment effect is only I can do that. Nobody can do that as well as me. So if I've got that mindset going on, how do you coach through? How do you invite your team to help you? How do you invite others to help you? Stop trying to do things you're not good at. I'm guilty of this. That's why Bailey's helping me now, because I really struggle with the LinkedIn and some of the Zoom. If you've followed me for the last four weeks, you know that things have gotten better. But if you're not good at something, invite a partner to help you with it. Ask a neutral second opinion. If you were me, would you keep doing this? Get some, and that would be, as you were talking as a leader to a direct report or as a coach to a client, don't just, gather some information about, is this really, in your best interest to keep doing what you're doing? And status quo bias, Marshall Goldsmith says the best indication of what you're going to be doing tomorrow is what you're doing today. And that's been true for 6 weeks. But when we go back to a certain reality, if this is what you do all the time, this is habitual behavior, and that becomes status quo. And be careful of those casual commitments that somebody says, oh, I need some help with this. And you go, oh, I think your idea is good. Well, now people think you're going to help them with their idea. So how are you making those casual commitments? Before it used to be casual commitments to do social things, and I'm sure we'll get back to that. But right now, are you making casual commitments on team calls to do things? So some ideas to help you coach your people who are not staying focused on their own work, but getting involved in work that doesn't really lead to their dream of being the best they could be. So questions, a quick question for our panelists. What are some ideas you can share about staying in the urgent, important, and not urgent, important spaces to help people focus on the work? Let's start with Kimberly.
So in this case, if you or your client aren't great at this skill in terms of being able to prioritize, managing your calendar, having the discipline in terms of how you spend your time, I tell leaders the number one thing they get paid for is to think. Their job is to move the progress of that department, division, enterprise, company, etc. forward, and they can't do that if they're out of capacity. So again, if folks are needing help with this, I always look to the data, and the data, it tends to be housed in online calendars these days. So go in and do an analysis about how have you spent your time. I used to work for a very talented CEO, and he taught the leaders of his company to do two things. On Sunday night, Monday morning, you analyze how you spent your time the previous week. How much time did you spend developing people, mentoring employees, working with clients, solving problems, etc. And then you do the same thing at the as a start of the upcoming week. What can you delegate away? What can you cancel? What can you postpone? What should be on your calendar that isn't? So color code your calendar, assess your calendar, and then if you have the good fortune to have an assistant, teach your assistant how to manage your calendar on your behalf, or obviously put some rules in place that you yourself can follow. And if you need a visual to help you or inspire you to do this, Google the YouTube video of Covey's Big Rocks demonstration. It will help you understand again how we truly are filling up our lives with a lot of small inconsequential things, which does not make room for the larger things, which Covey refers to as the big rocks.
Thank you, Kimberly. Another great idea. So I hope you all are taking away at least one idea, and I'm taking away several myself. So thank you, Kimberly. Monique.
Yes, the idea of helping you decide what's urgent, not urgent. I think there are a couple interesting questions to ask. First, how will I suffer if I don't do this? How will I benefit if I do it? And then how will others suffer if I don't do it? How will others benefit if I do it? Asking those kind of questions help you sort out where your own values lie and what makes you feel good about those kind of responses, and what you can embrace and what you can say no to and yes to, because somebody else's lack of preparation doesn't make it your urgent project. It might be things are falling on you because of other people's feeling like they're on vacation right now. You just don't know what people are doing in their home and how involved they're getting. So we have got a lot of weird behaviors, and you could be someone who needs to put more boundaries around what you're accepting to do. So that line of questioning, I think, just might help in that deciding urgent, important, and weighing out the implication.
I love that, Monique, having the decisional balance index that you shared. So what are the costs of doing it? What are the benefits of doing it? What are the costs of not doing it? What are the benefits of not doing it? So, you know, what you're actually suggesting is, when you're trying to lay out the difference between urgent and important and not urgent and important, and stay in those spaces, you have to think about it. You can't just be habitual and saying yes to things. So if you're coaching someone who just goes along with what's being asked, and they're struggling because they gave time to somebody else and now they don't have time for themselves, so that becomes a decision. So thanks for that, Monique. Marilyn.
Yeah, and I would add to both what Kimberly said and what Monique said. I mean, I think all good things to do, all good tactics, all good questions, but I usually try to take it a step even deeper with a person, and what is at the root cause of them taking all of this on. And so many times when I have done that, the noise is not noise extrinsically from the company or their leaders or their team members. The noise is from a voice in their head, usually telling them, I'm not enough and I have to keep doing more, and I can do all this and I have to prove myself. And you know, I thought about your quote from Gandhi, and who are they really trying to please? And it's a question I have asked people that I'm coaching, and that I encourage them to ask their team as well, because many times it's, I'm trying to prove to myself I'm good enough to do this. So when imposter syndrome is raging, that's when you see people out of control, busy, focusing on everything, and not taking the time to really be able to even analyze, as Monique suggested, you know, the benefit of yes and no to all of these different things. So first and foremost, getting at the root cause of what's going on inside their head. What story are they telling themselves about why they need to say yes to everything, and why they can't say no to more. And then the other thing I would just say on the keeping people focused right now on the important but not urgent, and I think that's the quadrant right now that in this COVID crisis has been a little bit ignored. Early on, everybody was doing what was urgent and important because it was what, you know, helping take care of our employees, helping get things organized with, if we're an essential business or a non-essential, what this looks like. But there was a great article by Johnson and Suskowitz, how I think you pronounce the second author's name. They wrote the book Lead from the Future, and they wrote a great article for HBR, and I didn't write down the name of the article, but I'll make sure, Peggy, you get it to put in the resources, about the fact that people now need to move into that space of what is, you know, important but not urgent from a strategy perspective. And we have to go back to redoing some strategic planning. So I think it's a great article that really helps you refocus and retool leaders to be able to do that.
Thank you for that. You know, I'm going to get off this call and go grab it. Thank you, Marilyn. I appreciate the resources and the way that we think about, you know, how we move into the future. So that was awesome. So we're going to close with Dan Pink's book on when. I love this book, and what he's really talking about is chronological time. And there's been a lot of research about chronological time, and we all know where we fit. So we're either larks, or we're third birds, or we're owls. We either love getting up in the morning and love going to bed, or we hate going to bed and hate getting up. So what's the challenge is when we have employees who actually are in the owl space, because we've made people all be larks. We got to go to work most of us between 7 and 9, and then we get done between 3 and 5. And so we're having to adapt sometimes as third birds and sometimes as owls. So what he says is we get a peak. So for larks, when you get up, you have a spike. And then you have a trough about lunchtime, right before lunchtime, and there's a big drop. And then after that, you have a subsequent recovery in the afternoon. And so owls are different. When the night people are waking up, they're actually in recovery, and then they have a trough, and then their spike is the afternoon. So knowing kind of where people have their energy. And so before I learned about chronological time and I was coaching, I was asking people, when is your energy highest? When your energy is highest is when you should be doing those urgent, important things, because you have the energy to do them. And so really being clear and going back to what the panelists were saying is what is urgent, what is important, and being able to leverage your ability from a chronological timing perspective. And so he says we're all birds. Dan Pink says we're all birds, and that it influences not only our physiology, but our psychology, our bedtimes, our mornings, in the middle of the day. Now he says that the larks are only 14%, and the third birds are the biggest piece. And then the owls are the 21%. So the challenges are really about, you know, who's really in that third bird category. Are they more leaning towards larkishness, or are they leaning towards owlishness? So here's bringing it a little closer to home. So 26,000 earning calls. They look through 26,000 rather. I love Dan Pink's work because somehow he has access to phenomenal researchers who are bringing this through for him to the examination. So this is very research oriented. They looked at 2,100 public companies, and what they found is those earning calls in the early morning were upbeat and positive. Towards late morning, they became negative and less resolute. They bounce after lunch, but then they start sliding again at the end of the day. When I've been working with salespeople who were actually making in-person calls, you know, those end of the day calls were really tough because the energy had gone for most people. Those first breakfast calls, lots of energy, lots of information. So one of the things I did tell Bailey yesterday, that not only does this research apply to earning calls, they've looked at when you have surgeries, and they've also looked at when you have judicial appointments, when you have with the judge, okay? And that judges' decisions that they make early in the morning are more lenient. And as you get later in the day, they're less lenient. And that's looking at decisions, timing of decisions when they're made. So if you're intending to be a criminal, it's really good that you get your attorney to schedule your hearing first thing in the morning, because you're going to get off a little bit more than you are if you get it closer to noon. But think about that for all of us, and think about the energy we have and how we have to manage our energy to avoid the distractions, because once we start being distracted, it just kind of goes down a slippery slope. So how do we leverage the troughs? We leverage the troughs by something beats nothing, doing something. So Dan says the ideal work situation is 15 minutes of work and 17 minutes of break. That doesn't work when we were in those office environments, but it kind of works now. And you could probably do 50-10. Think about college classes. We teach for 50 minutes and then we have a 10-minute break to get to the next class. So I think that he's onto something, that you've got to do some recovery in that trough. When you don't have any energy, get up, walk around. Don't keep sitting at your desk and keep going, because the energy's not there for you to be effective. Moving beats stationary. Social beats solo. So, you know, some of the things that we've learned before, you know, that we might not get back to. We might not be able to do this social. So when I think about being in an office environment, finding somebody to go for a walk, go have coffee with, but maybe you can do a Zoom call with someone to have a cup of coffee. That could be the social. Outside beats inside. So those of you in South Africa, I heard you can go outside if you walk around your own block. So you still can go outside, beats inside. For those of us in Arizona, it's not working so much because we're having 100-degree days. But think about how this applies to your own situation. Fully detached beats semi-detached. Walk away from your desk. Get that glass of water. Get that a cup of coffee. Move away and detach and breathe. So when we're feeling that low energy, being able to breathe through it can help as well. So when you think about making decisions, and this to me was fascinating. If you look at the bottom of the slide, there's a questionnaire from Dan Pink. So if you go to danpink.com/MCTQ, you can find out what kind of bird you are and what your chronological time looks like. But if you look at doing analytical tasks, so those analytical tasks are best in the morning for larks, early morning to mid-morning for the third bird. But the owl, if you've got a person that just has best energy in the afternoon, that's when they should be doing those really hard tasks, or the ones that require a lot of energy. So insight tasks happen. That's kind of like what comes in when you're just thinking, okay? But when you're thinking without constraints. So we're not judging what we're thinking, we're just allowing a free flow of thoughts. So if we want to be creative and innovative, and we're larks, that's best in the afternoon. Third birds, late afternoon, early evening. Owls are best at insight tasks in the morning. Making an impression, all in the morning, because we're all morning people, whether we want to be or not. And making decisions, so early morning to late afternoon, depending on where you are in that chronological time. So when I think about distractions, I think that it's really important as you're coaching people to not fit into a certain mode. They need to fit in their own mold, okay? So here's an action plan. The slides will be available, or this action plan particularly will be available out on the communities of practice. So when you're coaching somebody, what's their commitment? What are the resources needed? What will you both look at from a success measurement? And thinking back to that question on competence measures, you know, what would you be measuring, and what would be successful? What's going to get in the person's way? So if you've got some people that are struggling with distractions, what are going to get in their way, and what will progress look like? So final thoughts, and this is really important. So buffer time. You know, we say something's going to take us an hour, and most of us take an hour and a half, 2 hours. So make sure you add an extra percentage for buffer time. Know where the landmines are. Track, focus on progress, making progress. You know, write things down. I love the work of David Allen in getting things done. He says you've got to write things out of your head on paper. Otherwise, your head is just working to solve problems all the time instead of actually getting things done. Have an accountability partner that works with you to help you be successful. So, you know, encouraging your teams to work together to hold each other accountable. Leverage routine and habits. We're going to have a big conversation about habit development sometime in June, and stay in the present. So I'm getting to the top of the hour. I apologize, panelists. We're not going to get to the chronological time question, but the resources that we introduced today were things by Simon Sinek, Start With Why, When, Dan Pink, Essentialism by Greg McEwen, and also TED Talk by Angela Duckworth. the other things that people suggested we'll have available in the communities of practice. So as we're wrapping up, think passion, purpose, perseverance. They will keep the person going in terms of avoiding distractions. Think intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, and what are those motivations your team and your direct reports and the people you coach have. Focus people on the essential, and remember that timing is everything. So I'm not going to have time for questions. If you have questions, please reach out. The upcoming conversations are moving to Fridays only at 10 a.m. Go to, the theme will be coaching to agility, self-coach, leader, and organization. Go to Global IOC for more information for the registration link. The registration link will also be available on our LinkedIn page. So like us on LinkedIn. There's going to be a community of practice room that is going to start to be populated by next Friday when you're on a call with us. And there'll also be thought leadership opportunities for you to read about what the research has been done. And next week, make sure you join us next week, because our topic next week is going to be on team coaching. So I'm going to close for now. Thank you so much for being with us. And I look forward to being with you next Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern as we talk about team coaching. And thanks for the panelists. You guys always contribute such great ideas. You women always contribute such great ideas. And thank you for your participation. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.